so Year 9, Term 5, the topic we're going to be looking at is resource and resource management, and our big question is, how our resources distribute, which means spread globally and in the UK, and we focus on food, and we're looking at how can we ensure food security is sustainable. So the term resource, okay, can be used for anything that's got purpose or value, and it's normally finite or limited in supply. The three main resources that we're interested in geography specifically, are food, water and energy. So that is an oil well digging out oil. So first, why is food important? You need food to stay healthy, prevent malnourishment, it gives you energy to go to school, to go to work, it helps you develop, reduces incidence and how often you get disease. You need a balanced and varied diet, and you need to eat it sensibly, because if not, you can become ill from eating too much food. We call it obesity. In terms of water, we need water on a daily basis for drinking, washing, cooking. If we drink dirty water, we can get waterborne diseases which can kill you, such as cholera. If we don't look after water quality, it can become polluted, and this is a big challenge in the UK. In LICs in poorer parts of the world, it tends to be down to the children. We call them water chores, and the children have to walk long distances to go and fetch water for the family when they should be in school. And another example, water is needed to irrigate, which means artificially water crops. So the food that people eat and we eat, we need water for that. Energy, so quite obviously, I think it's needed for industry and transport. Okay, so think cars, think trains, think factories. If you have got a good energy supply, industry can develop, which means GNI in a country can improve, which means countries can get wealthier. You depend on reliable energy. Like now, I've got no fear that this light's going to go off because we have got reliable energy supply in England. Risk of polluting global warming, we do have to be wary of this. So in year 10, we will look at oil. They extract oil which is used for energy in Nigeria. However, there are many oil spills in a village called Bodo, which has had consequences which will last for a very long time. LICs don't just use the type of energy that we are aware of. They also use things like fuel wood and kerosene, and it's not particularly very good. If you're cooking with wood in your house and you're breathing that in, it can make you ill. So, resources are not distributed, spread fairly around the world. So if we look at food and where undernourishment takes place, sub-Saharan Africa is a place that are very undernourished. Alright? Whereas HICs such as USA, England, UK and Europe only have a small amount of people undernourished. It's not fair. We have enough, they don't. In terms of energy consumption, you can see that the biggest consumers of energy are countries such as the USA or the European Union Trading Group, whereas Asia Pacific countries and countries like India only use a small amount of energy. And in terms of water, water scarcity is when there's not enough water for you to maintain, your healthy daily needs. Again, in Northern Africa, Saharan Desert, there's water scarcity, and in countries in Asia, little or no water scarcity, surprise, surprise, HICs such as in North America and Europe, and economic water scarcity. It's like generally the whole of Africa just can't afford to invest in the infrastructure to spread water. Now, use of resources is also different depending on a country's level of development. So in HICs, we use a relatively small amount for agriculture, which is farming, whereas LICs, over 80% of their water is used for farming. Again, if we look at industrial use, HICs use a large amount for industrial use, nearly 60%, but because of the lack of economic development and the low amount of people working in the secondary sector of the economy, it's only 10%. And again, domestic in the house, HICs use more. Now we're going to look at food in the UK. So the UK imports about 40% of the total food it consumes. So 4 out of every 10 pieces of food come from abroad. And why is this? Well, the reason is because it's cheaper to import food from other countries. Alright, things like animal feed are much cheaper in other countries, so it lowers the cost of our food. The UK climate is unsuitable. Okay, things like cocoa can't be grown in the UK. Demand for greater choice and variety. When you go to the supermarket, you know, consumers, us, demand to be able to choose exactly what they want to eat, no matter where it comes from. Supermarkets are big and they're able to stock all these different ones. But my favourite one is demand for seasonal food all year round, such as strawberries in winter. You can eat strawberries any day of the year, but they only grow during the warm season, and that's why we import food. And this leads to food miles, and the definition of food miles is the distance travelled from where the food is grown to the consumer's plate. And if we just have a quick glance at this map, we can see things like blueberries from the USA travel 5,300 kilometres to the UK, or lamb from New Zealand travels a whopping 18,800 kilometres. All this transport leads to more air pollution because the vehicles transporting them are going to be burning fossil fuels, and this will increase our carbon footprint. Now, there are ways we can reduce the problem and the need for imported food and reduce our carbon footprint. The first example is organic farming. Now, organic farming is when no machines, no pesticides are used. Any weeds that are taken out of the ground are done by, you know, a human hand. The problem with this is organic food costs more to produce and it's more expensive, and consumers like me probably just go for the cheaper option. The other alternative is agribusiness. Now, agribusiness, agricultural business, is just when farmers get together and say, you know what, we're going to produce as much food as possible, no matter what. They use combine harvesters, they use tractors, they use pesticides, and it's all about making as much money and as much food as possible. Now, water in the UK. If we look at domestic water use, 30% of it is used for flushing the toilet. Alright, so nearly a third of all water in our homes goes quite literally down the toilet, and there's other things like bathing, clothes washing, showering, etc. on there. If we look at water demand as a whole, households consume 47% or demand 47% of all water. A massive 21% gets leaked. Services 13%, we use 5% for manufacturing, and other is 14%. Now, this creates problems because not every region in England has the same water supply. If we look at this map, we can see population density. Population density is the amount of people per square kilometre. In the southeast, in and around the city of London, population density is very high. However, if we look at this next map, it shows us precipitation, and we can see they only get moderate amounts of water, and that can lead to a water deficit when there's not enough water. However, if we look back here at Wales, they have generally a low or medium population density, but this map shows they have very heavy precipitation, so there's a water surplus. Now, we can transfer water from one place to another, but it's a very expensive process. But as demand increases, we don't want people to be under water stress, so we do need to transfer water from one side of the country to another. Now, managing water in the UK. The first one we can manage is legislation. Okay, so things such as you must have water efficient toilets built in your new bathroom, or if you use your hose pipe you will get fined, or if you pollute rivers you will get fined. Alright, but there are other ways. One example we can talk about is grey water. So grey water is basically using water that we may have used in the bath or shower to water our plants in our garden, say we're using fresh water. Another example is water efficiency, such as putting sprinklers on the ends of taps so we use less water. Or having water meters put on our homes, which will encourage people because they don't want to pay more to use less water. Hose pipes bans, as I previously mentioned. Green roofs help to collect, store and purify water. Wastewater treatment plants, these are essential. Waste goes from your house to these plants, it is treated and then it can be used again. And as I mentioned, water transfer schemes such as the Elan Valley Water Transfer Scheme that uses a gravity-fed pipe to bring water from high precipitation, low population density Wales to high population density Birmingham. Managing energy in the UK. So, as time's gone on, our reliance on fossil fuels has decreased, as you can see by this compound line graph. However, on a positive, we are starting to use more renewable sources, this blue line demonstrates, such as wind and hydro. Nuclear, which is neither fossil fuel nor renewable, also accounts for a decent amount of how much fuel we use and energy we use. But we can reduce it. One way is low energy appliances. So if you go to Currys to buy a new fridge, it will have a rating between A++, and F. The higher the rating, the less energy it uses. Another example is there's less heavy industry in the UK now due to deindustrialisation, so less energy is being used there. We can use building insulation, so when we heat our homes, rather than all that lovely heat being let out into the atmosphere, the insulation will trap it in the house. And finally, we can have fuel efficient cars, or even now electric cars that don't actually burn fossil fuels. If we look at the UK's energy mix, which is the range and proportion of energy used by a country, we can see that coal used to account for nearly 75%, and now it accounts for around about 35%, a big reduction there. What is good to see on this one is that the renewables slice is growing, so about 15% in 2014, whereas 1990, 2007, it was only about 5%. So we are using more renewables. Okay, we're now going to be moving on to the second half where we focus on food security on a global scale. Global means around the world. So if we have a look at this map, we can see the places that have got extreme levels of food insecurity, and no surprise, it is generally sub-Saharan African countries below the Sahara Desert, which are landlocked, which have poor access to water supplies and have low levels of economic development. HOCs such as the USA and European countries generally have very little food insecurity. What are the causes? So, climate change is a big cause. If it doesn't rain and you have drought, you cannot grow crops. Okay, so that is one cause. Alternatively, if it's really hot, your animals might die and you can't work as hard. Pests and diseases such as locusts can literally decimate and kill your crops. Pests and diseases, less food, more food insecurity. Technology or lack of it. If you've only got basic technology, you can't harvest as much food. Water supply, we need water to irrigate our crops. If you've got little water supply, you're going to grow less food. And conflict, during conflict, many soldiers will often steal or destroy enemy food because it will make the enemy weaker. Also, if you're fighting a war, you can't tend to your crops. And probably the most obvious one is poverty. People in LOCs literally haven't got enough money to be able to afford nutritious food. So what are the impacts? So famine is quite a devastating impact, and it's a widespread shortage of food. Famine, if you've not got enough food, ultimately you can die. You'll become malnourished, you might suffer from headaches, you'll become tired, and ultimately you could die. Another example is undernutrition, when you don't have enough vitamins and minerals in your diet. This can again cause illnesses, your immune system won't work, you'll be tired, you won't work as hard or learn as much. Social unrest or food riots, if prices rise, people will, kick off quite literally because they need food to feed their families. You get soil erosion, so if land is used too much or poor quality land is cultivated upon, the soil will eventually get washed away and it will be good for nothing. And if there's less of something, the price will rise. So inflation that's currently happening in the UK, because there's more demand and less of everything, the prices are going up. How can we increase food supply? So one way of increasing food supply is irrigation, which, as I've said, artificially waters the land. And irrigation means that water can get to where it's needed, such as these drip irrigation systems, and it can improve your crop yields. Another example is hydroponics, where you don't actually need soil. The roots of the plants are actually in a mineral-rich water, which I could quite literally grow a tomato plant in this classroom if I wanted to. Aeroponics doesn't even need the water. The roots are dangled in the air and a mist of nutrients is sprayed upon it. However, these two techniques you've got to consider are not going to be very LIC friendly because they're expensive to set up. It's been cut off the top, but this is the new green revolution. Now, ultimately, the new green revolution is focusing on sustainability and community, and it was believed to be started in India in 2006. And things that they are doing to increase food supplies, more water harvesting, soil conservation, protecting the soil, irrigating the land, and improving the seeds that they use. So maybe they use seeds that are not prone to disease or they're more drought resistant. Another example is biotechnology. If you've ever heard of GM crops, this is biotechnology. Ultimately, you can inject the certain plants with genetics from another strain of plant. So, for example, if plant A is good at resisting drought, whereas plant B grows really big potatoes or tomatoes, whatever we're growing, if we put those together, the crop would be a super crop that can resist drought and grow really big crops. That is GM food. The favourite one is, my favourite one is appropriate technology. Give these people in LICs technology they can use, such as this bike. When you pop in coffee beans on the husk there, you pedal on the bike, it will take the coffee beans off. It will speed things up, and it's not likely to break. It's not really complicated to use. Now, we need to know about a large-scale agricultural development. Large-scale, think really big. And we use something called the Indus Basin Irrigation System, IBIS, that spreads across India and Pakistan. It's such a big scheme. And it's the largest irrigation scheme in the world. It involves 3 dams and 1.6 million kilometres of streams that irrigate agricultural land. Loads and loads of stream, loads and loads of land irrigated. And we can see, here is the River Indus. This red line shows the drainage basin, so any drop of rain that lands within this drainage basin eventually gets to the River Indus, and it spans across both India and Pakistan. This is an example of a canal that transports the water from one place to another. This is an example of a dam. The water will be stored behind it, released when needed, and can also generate hydroelectric power. Social opportunities, 14 million hectares of land is now irrigated. All these people living there can now farm the land and have got more food. An economic opportunity is the crop yields have increased. For example, wheat's gone up by 36%. This means farmers can make more money. It will increase their standard of living. And in environmental opportunities, the hydroelectric power is generated by the dams. This is clean electricity which can be put to use to hopefully develop the country. But there are many challenges, social challenges. Farmers upstream tend to take an unfair share of the water, so those at the bottom don't get enough water. That will cause problems for people. The economic challenge is the high cost, 1, to build the scheme, and 2, to maintain it. And this has led to the reservoirs not being maintained as well as they might have been. And environmental, high summer temperatures result in high water loss through evaporation. So because this water is now spread out of a larger area, the sun baking down on it will increase evaporation. Just think of a towel after you've had a shower. If you scrunch it up, it won't dry, whereas if you spread it out, it will dry quicker. Same principle here. We now need to look at sustainable food supplies, and this is in HIC. So how can food be produced more sustainable? So first one is permaculture, or permanent culture, which uses the natural environment to grow as many crops as possible. We've got organic farming. Organic farming, as we mentioned earlier, uses no pesticides, it uses no machinery, so carbon footprint is lowered. Urban farming. So you might think of an allotment, but growing any crops in any space in a town or city is urban farming. Sustainable meat, okay? The cows are allowed to roam on the land. They're not treated with antibiotics or anything, and they're not over-farmed. And the sustainable fish, the Marine Stewardship Council ensures that fishing is done in a sustainable way. If you consider the Barents Sea around Svalbard, monitored by Norway, that would be the work of the MSC, reducing overfishing. Now, we can look at a specific example of sustainable food supplies in an LIC, and our case study example for this is the work that's done in Makueni County in Kenya. Ultimately, they have built sand dams. Now, Makueni County's got a population of just under 1,885,000. Most people, there's not as much urbanisation in Kenya, live in small, isolated rural communities. They've got fertile soils so they can grow crops such as maize and sweet potatoes, but there's not enough water, with only an average of 500 millimetres a year. So they've got the soil but not the water, and this is where sand dams come in. A sand dam works by building an artificial barrier across a river. During the wet season, any sediment that is transported along the river will get trapped behind the dam and start to build up. So, in future years, any water that falls down will be filtered through the sand and it will lie underneath the sand. This will reduce evaporation, and ultimately they put a pump into the water at the bottom. There you have it. You've got sustainable, renewable food supply, and it's called the African Sand Dam Foundation, or the ASDF. Here you can see a dam being built. As you can see, it's local people in the community who are doing the building, which adds to sustainability. If they need to repair it, they can. And they use local materials, so local wood, local muds and cements are used in the construction. And here we have a sand dam when it is full of water, and this would mean that little kids who normally have to do their water chores can access the water very quickly to irrigate their crops. And the successes have been: rural villages have had sand dams, they're cost effective, which means they're not expensive, crop yields, the amount of crops produced and food security is increased, and there are less waterborne diseases such as cholera. Alright, so homework then. 3 tasks. First one, you need to complete a research project for a large scale agricultural project. You can use IBIS or choose another one such as Almeria in Spain. Have a look at that, it's pretty cool. Task 2, create a glossary of all the key terms that have been discussed in this topic, so all the causes of food insecurity, the different types of energy that we use, water surplus, water deficit, words like that. Or finally, design a sustainable urban farming project that could produce food in a local area. Draw a diagram, add annotations. You might want to consider the square in the centre of the academy for your planning.